Picture this. You've worked hard your whole life, built a home, put away some savings, maybe even started a business. Now imagine it all getting stuck in legal limbo after you're gone. Your family waiting months, even years, while courts, fees, and nosy neighbors pick it apart. Or worse, your kids blow through their inheritance because they didn't set the rules. Sounds like a nightmare, right? Well, today we're diving into the ultimate estate planning showdown, wills versus trust. I'm James Jones, local Tacoma estate planning attorney, and by the end of today's episode, you'll know exactly what you're going to need to protect your legacy and keep the wolves at bay. So let's get started.
You are listening to the Legacy Talk podcast hosted by James A. Jones,
attorney at law and founder of Sound Legacy Law, PLLC in Tacoma.
Attorney Jones is here to talk about how to best protect your family, assets, and wealth, pulling stories from his more than 20 years of helping families and business owners protect their assets, create their estate plans, preserve their wealth, and plan for the future. Nobody wants to think about estate planning, but life has a way of sneaking up on you, and at any moment, something unexpected could happen that will leave you regretting not having acted sooner. So join Attorney James A. Jones in the Legacy Talk podcast, and together learn how to plan for your future today and have peace of mind tomorrow.
Welcome to Legacy Talk. I'm your host, James Jones. On today's show, we're talking about wills versus trust. Which one do you really need? And I want to start today's episode with a story, or really two stories. The story of Joe and Sally, my favorite anonymous names. So Joe, first part of the story, Joe and his wife were clients of mine who had a pretty normal estate. They had a house, they had investments, bank accounts, nothing unusual, pretty run-of-the-mill. Now, Joe and his wife were an older couple. They had grown kids. They had grandkids that they wanted to benefit, a couple of which I think that they had raised. When we set up their plan, we went over their options as to what made the most sense for their estate and decided that they wanted to put together a revocable living trust. Now, pivoting over to Sally, Sally and her husband were not originally my clients. They were also an older couple with typical assets. They had a house, investments, savings, grown kids. They had a will as their estate planning document. Their main estate planning document was a will. Now, I never met Sally's husband because he had already passed away when I met her to open probate for his estate. You may say, James, I thought you didn't need to go through probate if you had a will. That's false. A will does not prevent probate. Sally was forced to probate her husband's estate, transfer the house and other assets to herself just to get them out of his name. And we'll get more into that today later in the episode. So what about Joe? What happened to him? Well, Joe met me once after his wife died. We answered some questions about the next steps, grieved a little bit. A couple weeks later, Joe came back in. I went to work while he was gone, signed a couple documents related to continuing the trust, and we were done. Joe's estate administration was done. It probably took about 2 hours of Joe's time, both of those hours sitting with me. Meanwhile, Sally had to open probate. She had to deal with the courts, with creditors, with statutory waiting periods. And about 6 months later, we were able to close that estate. So the question we're answering today is, what do you need, a will or a trust? Now, thinking on Joe versus Sally, you may have your answer, but let's go through a couple of things to help you make those decisions, okay? So we wanted to start off with the basics, okay? What is a will and what is a trust? Well, a will is a legal document that tells everyone who gets your assets, like your house, your car, your guitar, after you pass, right? But a will only works when you're gone, okay? It doesn't become effective as far as anything happening with it until someone dies, okay? A trust is like a bucket that you put your assets into now, okay? You decide who manages it. Typically during your lifetime, you're the manager of the trust, called a trustee. You decide who gets what, and it's active during your lifetime and after, okay? The difference between a trust and a will is that the will is like a one-time use thing, okay? When I die, do this, okay? Trusts are more of a flexible, ongoing plan. So you could think of it with a will, like a will with superpowers, okay? It's like a super will. So James, who needs a will? Spoiler alert, almost everybody needs a will. So if you're young, just starting out, if you got a kid or a pet that you want to have cared for, you need to have someone to name guardians. You need to have a trust probably created for the kid so that someone can manage their estate. And it ensures that your wishes aren't left to chance having that will. Okay. If you have a simple estate, you have a house and a bank account, typically a will would work. A will is going to work for everything. I'm going to tell you this. A will is going to work for everything. The question is it going to be a pain in the butt to deal with? Okay. If it's a very uncomplicated estate, a will probably works. Okay. It's just the administration side that's a problem. A will's a little bit cheaper on the front end. So it's like a starter pack, right? It's easy to draft. It's low cost typically. And especially for young people or people with very simple estates, it gets the job done. Okay. A trust is a little different, right? A trust is just like a will as far as it takes your stuff and it says who gets what and it says who's in charge. Okay. But the difference between the trust and the will is that the will has to go through that probate process, through the court process, which we'll get into in a bit. And the trust skips that. Okay. It skips the public probate process. So your financial life doesn't end up on display to the world. Okay. Oftentimes, if you have complex assets, a trust is better. If you have rental properties, if you have business, you have large investments, if you have a taxable estate, a trust usually works better. Okay. And a trust allows you, just like a will, but a trust allows you to pick someone in charge when you're not there to manage everything without having to go to court, without any delays, just to put your plan in action. Okay. So what is probate, James? What is it? Well, it's a time suck for one. Probate can drag on for months, sometimes years, leaving your heirs waiting for courts to sort out the mess. And it's frustrating. Okay. And probate's not free. Probate's not free. Well, you can go get your simple time, will. And when you die, that's going to cost some money to administer through probate. Okay. You're paying attorneys, you're paying court fees, you're paying appraisers. That takes a bite out of your estate. Sometimes up to 4 or 5% of the value can be reduced by the probate process, maybe more, actually, I've seen. And one of the biggest things besides the time suck is that everybody sees your stuff. Your will becomes public record. They're required to file an inventory with the court. That's public record. So nosy neighbors, even scammers can get involved, peeking into what you guys have left behind. Nobody wants that. So if you want to have privacy and control, the trust is for you. Okay. We're not keeping score. Just keep score in your head. A trust can set conditions. So this is a trust can set conditions for your kids. Okay. That they can hold their inheritance until they finish college or until they get married or until they start a business or until they reach a certain age. A trust can be created so it has a spendthrift provision, which basically means if your kid's bad with money, the trust can drip feed them funds over time instead of handing it over in a lump sum that they're going to blow. I've seen so many people blow their money, their kids blow their money because there wasn't any rules, right? And with the trust for your kids, you can plan decades ahead. You can plan for grandkids' education. You can plan for your kids' retirement. If you made a lot of money and you say, well, my kid can be an artist or whatever, they can have a simple job. They don't have to make a ton of money because there's extra money for them later when they retire because I created this trust. A will can't do that. Okay. So we go back to costs, right? I said that a will is a cheaper version of a trust. It's a cheaper entry-level model, but is it really cheaper? That's the question. Let's think about this. The upfront cost on a will is lower than a trust, okay? Wills will win in the short term. It's going to cost a little bit less today, a little easier on the wallet today than a trust. But in the long run, you're going to have to go through the probate process, which is going to cost a lot of money, thousands and thousands of dollars. And think about, you're going to pay the lawyer fees, you're going to pay the court fees, and you're also going to dedicate several months or years of your time dealing with it, okay? So think about this. I could pay a little bit more now and have something that's so much easier for my kids, my executor, my trustee to deal with, not have to go to court, have it be private, than paying more later with a will, okay? So do you spend a little bit more now for that peace of mind that you're avoiding probate, that you're protecting your kids, that you're saving people time and money, or do you go for the bargain basement price? It doesn't matter, right? For me, it doesn't matter. Like when I meet with clients, I'm always telling them, if it were me, I'd do a trust, because why would you want to go through probate? Even if it's a simple probate, even if your kids are best friends, why would you want to waste the time and pay a lawyer and pay the court's fees that you can avoid by paying a little bit more now for a much more functional document? That's what I say. And I'm in the business, okay? It's fine with me if you do a will and come do a probate with me. It doesn't matter, okay? Because I do both. I'd much rather do trusts every day than probates, honestly. Then think about privacy, right? We touched on this a little bit. Wills are public. Once they're probated, anyone can look up your will, your assets, your debts, who gets what, who doesn't get something, who did you cut out. But trusts stay between you and your trustee and your beneficiaries, okay? Even if you cut out a kid that's your kid, they don't get a copy of the trust. There's no public record. There's no nosy neighbors. There's no scammers, because they can't see it. They can't see it. And the other thing, back to Sally and Sally's story, who went through probate. Another thing that Sally had to deal with now was that now that she filed a probate, everything that she had was public. Anyone could look up their stuff. And that's something that didn't sit well with her, I know. And it's something that you can easily avoid, okay? What other things are trusts good for versus wills? So a will, by itself, just distributes stuff. A will can create trusts called testamentary trusts. That means a trust that's created by a will, but a will is not a trust, okay? So trusts are great for special needs beneficiaries. It can provide disabled loved ones assets without jeopardizing their government benefits. Wills can't do that. If you just distribute to something directly in a will, they could lose their benefits. They could lose their Medicaid. They could lose their disability payments. Trusts are also good for blended families. Trusts let you carve out specific shares for stepkids, for biological kids, for a new spouse without having as many family feuds. I can't guarantee that that won't happen. It just happens a lot less, okay? And you can customize it. Like any document is customizable. A will can be customizable. A trust can be customizable. But a trust has a little bit more strings, okay? You can tweak a trust for unique situations, particularly ensuring that your second husband, or if you're the first to die, your husband doesn't go and disinherit your kids from the previous marriage, which happens all the time. All the time. That doesn't happen when you do a trust in a blended family. Now, who helps you do these documents? I've got a whole episode on the trappings of or failings of do-it-yourself wills. Don't do it. Don't do it. I fix a lot of do-it-yourself wills. Don't do it. Pay a few dollars more for someone with experience to help you with your will, okay? Or with your trust, ideally with your trust. But even a will, even a simple will, is something that you don't want to do online because there's a lot of nuance to it, and there's a lot of things that should be done properly that sometimes if you're doing it yourself, you don't know. For one, you didn't go to law school. You weren't interested in it. I went to law school, so you didn't have to. Okay, like lawyers go to law school, so you don't have to. Okay, so use a professional. Use a professional. I'm biased, but use a professional. Now, think about this. James, if I do a trust, that's all I need, right? That's also false, okay? Typically, when you do a trust, and the trust that we're talking about versus a will in most cases is a revocable living trust, like Joe had, revocable living trust, which is a trust that's for his lifetime that he's usually in charge of. He's the beneficiary of. Okay. But when you do a revocable living trust, you also do a will. Well, why? Well, first of all, you want to make sure that the will and the trust, or the trust and whatever else you have, don't conflict, right? So you have something called a pour over will that basically catches and syncs with your trust and catches anything that you might have forgotten to put into your trust. And it puts it into the trust, okay? The will says, hey, if I've got any assets that are non my trust, when I die, put them in the trust, okay? That's what the will does. And even with a trust, a will has to do certain things, okay? A trust can't appoint a guardian. You do that through a will. So if you have minor children under 18, you have a will that says these people will be the guardians for my kids. So not doing a will would be a big problem because then you're putting the state in charge of making that decision. You don't want the state in charge of making those decisions. So what do you think? If you had to guess, maybe comment below in the comment section of the podcast, wherever you're watching this or listening to this. Are you not sure which one fits? Reach out to me. I'll be glad to help. But it's a pretty clear choice that a revocable living trust as a base estate planning document far supersedes a will. Okay. Now, neither plan is perfect. Neither plan is exactly done. It doesn't exactly work unless you do it right. Okay. There's failings with trusts, like not funding the trust, not putting your stuff in it. That can be a problem with a trust. But if you do it right with a professional that's done it for a long time, you should have no problem. Okay. So let's get back to our Joe versus Sally story. So Joe, wife passed away, very sad. Took him about 2 hours of time to get her estate dealt with because they had a trust beforehand. Sally took several months dealing with neighbors looking at her stuff, dealing with creditors, dealing with having to transfer assets from her husband's name to her name in a probate proceeding with the court. I'll give you a little bit here. When it's a client like that comes to my office that is looking for, their husband passed away or their wife passed away or spouse, 99 out of 100 times, that person that just went through probate with their spouse does what? They do a revocable trust for their remaining estate so that their kids don't have to go through that mess. And that's exactly what Sally did. We did the probate for her husband. It took several months. It wasn't the greatest thing in the world, but we got through it. We made it as easy as we could for her because we do a lot of probate and we really try to make it easy for our clients to go through probate. But there's still things to do and it takes a long time. But we made a revocable trust for Sally. Okay. And we funded it properly with those assets that were causing probates before. They will not cause probate again. So if I'm going to advise, in most cases, a trust is better than a will. There's limited places where a will is probably fine, usually for younger couples, that just starting out group. But a trust, if you're anywhere settled, is probably the better choice and the simpler choice. And in the long run, the cheaper choice for your estate plan, at least at the base level. So we've talked about wills. We've talked about trusts. In our next episode, we're going to be talking about something that's sometimes hard to do when talking about wills and trusts, is talking to your friends and family about estate planning. So stick around for that one. Check out that one next week. Thanks for listening to today's episode of Legacy Talk. If you liked today's episode and would like to learn more, please like and subscribe for more great content. I have been your host, James Jones. To your legacy.
Thank you for listening to the Legacy Talk podcast by attorney James A. Jones. If you found today's episode helpful, we ask that you like and follow us on all major platforms so you don't miss out on the latest episode. If you have questions for Attorney Jones, reach out at info@joneslegacylaw.com or visit our website at joneslegacylaw.com. Join us again next week for another episode of the Legacy Talk podcast.